So I'm here tonight with Ron Clark. Ron's the lead church planter at the Agape Church in Portland, Oregon. And the Agape Church is what I call a central city church. It really serves a variety of people, but they have a strong ministries in the area of domestic violence and working against domestic violence, and then in homelessness. And Ron and his wife Lori have been highly engaged with that. So, Ron, if you could just kind of give us a quick thumbnail of your life, kind of how you became a Christian, your education, just kind of let us get a sense of who you are.
Okay. Yeah, my dad was in the military, and he was an atheist. Probably, he claimed to be an atheist, but I would consider him more agnostic. And he was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, so he was gone a lot when I was little. And my mom got us going to church. And my brother and I were the kids that got kicked out of Sunday school class. We were pretty wild, and we were pretty bad as little kids. And but I remember the Presbyterian minister used to visit my mom, and it was a good way, visit my mom on a regular basis when my dad was in Vietnam. And he gave me a Bible, and I always tried to look at church and go to church, and even high school, I got confirmed in the Lutheran church in high school. I got quote, saved my senior year in high school, reading a tract, and so I spent a lot of my life, even though my dad was totally against church, very negative about it, at least going there, it represented something positive. And then when I was at the University of Missouri, Columbia, in veterinary school, and I was getting pounded in the grade work. It was horrible. I had spent 3 years at Central Missouri, undergraduate, and got into vet school, luckily, and I got baptized in the Stadium Boulevard Church of Christ in Columbia. A guy studied with me, electrical engineering student, and I got baptized. I flunked out of vet school and went back to Central Missouri to finish up in biology and chemistry, and I baptized 3 of my best friends that had taught me in the Navigators, and we had a lot of, became very apologetic. We had a lot of arguments with Navigator leaders, pastors about baptism, and we could really prove that baptism was, something that you needed to do. Unfortunately, our spirit was very negative there, and then, but I got accepted to the Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, to get a PhD in biochemistry, and I turned it down to work with a small church in rural Missouri, and I just started helping them, and eventually ended up getting pulled up to a town, Chillicothe, Missouri, working with a minister there and being a youth minister, and I met Lori, and through time we ended up going to Harding grad school. I started going there, and then did ministry in Missouri for a long time with small churches, and then moved out to Portland in 1998. Worked with a bigger church, finished my doctorate at Harding grad school, and after about 8 years, we were doing a lot of domestic violence work in the community and serving in the community. And Stan met with me for coffee after I'd met with Kit McKean, who I was not going to tell I was frustrated with ministry the way it was, and Stan met with me right afterwards, and I was just sharing that with him, and thought, we really want to reach people, but it's just difficult here. And Stan said, I think you need to plant churches. And I went home and talked to Lori about it. She said, I think that's a good idea.
So I remember that you and I met at the coffee shop at Starbucks, and had that conversation. And as I remember, you went home and told Lori that I had said you might be a church planter, and you didn't think so, and she didn't take what you were saying very well.
Well, she was, actually she was like, I think we should do it. And I didn't think she would really go for it, but Lori's always had a heart for that, and she's seen how much we care about people, and how well the Northwest has been a great place. And I called Everett Hufford and said, I got, oldest son was in junior high, and said this doesn't seem like a good thing to do with a kid in the youth group. And Everett shared with me research being done by the Methodist Church that kids in youth groups have a harder time in their faith, but those of church plants tend to be more intergenerational and do better. So
Yeah, and you've got
God
three.
was pointing to all that.
You've got three boys, and wait,
Yep.
you're wearing the great Oregon gear
Yes.
there because your oldest son is attending the University of Oregon. So you
Yep.
guys are now official Ducks. So how was that, raising your kids? Because Nathan was, he was in early high school when you started, so it really was impacting on his adult life.
Yeah. Yeah. It was. I think I've noticed with all three of the boys, because their other ones are about 10 years behind Nathan, but Nathan grew up in the established church and it was really good for him. But he grew up going to nursing homes and visiting older people. Caleb and Hunter have grown up visiting homeless people, getting to know people in smaller contexts. The interesting thing about Nathan, though, that experience when he was older with church planning has impacted him because he and his wife, they've been married a year. They're seniors at the University of Oregon, and they're both going to go into social type work. His goal is to work in low income housing and develop those with property management. So he really, we've at least given him a heart for people and to learn to be respectful and to reach out to people that way.
So he really sees the idea of taking his vocation into the world as a
Yeah,
kingdom project,
yeah,
as a
yeah,
kingdom piece.
yeah, yeah.
Tell us a little
He,
bit about the Agape Church and just give us a flavor so we know. We're going to get into Ron's books here in a minute, but I think to have the Agape Church background as a flavor for him will be very important for us.
Yeah, the Agape Church of Christ, we really feel committed to being involved in the community, and I think the thing that's driven us is we believe that God has called churches, Christians, to be advocates for marginalized people in the community, and we see the Bible as being written to marginalized communities, and those who have been blessed by God and have tremendous wealth. As Paul says, give as you've been prospered, and we know that they are a big part of doing any kind of reform in the communities, the church community, anywhere. And so what we've done at Agape is we've seen a very safe environment where victims, survivors, the little ones feel safe, they feel welcome, and they feel validated. And people with a sense of privilege are able to walk in and treat people with respect and lay that down. And that's been hard because we do get people who come in, and we've had to confront them about, whether it's abuse or control or looking down their nose at, those who are God's children. And it's been difficult for some of them, and it's been too difficult, and they've had to go on somewhere else. But the ones who've stayed, and I'm amazed at the young men and women who are awesome parents. They love their kids. They love other people's kids. They treat people with respect, and they're reaching out into their community. And so we've tried to create a safe environment where peace and justice reign, and then we take that into our community.
Great. Well, Ron, besides some of the many things that he does, he teaches at George Fox University. He does some of their doctoral work and works with students who particularly are in the counseling area and looking to talk about domestic violence and then just the broader social justice and kingdom issues. Out of that work, Ron has written a trilogy of books. He has written The God of Second Chances, which is about the exile and comes from the prophetic literature of the Old Testament. Then Jesus Unleashed, which is out of the Gospel of Luke. And then soon to be published is The Spirit Unleashed, which is looking at Acts. And as I've read through the first two, the agape context is just really enriching into these books. So, Ron, walk us through. First, kind of talk with what was your motivation for these books? What were you hoping to get out into the broader world?
Well, the first one is on the prophets of exile. Okay, so I taught at Cascade College, which is a Church of Christ school. I taught here on the post-exilic prophets quite a few years ago, and that was way back before we started Agape, and so that started getting me thinking a lot about prophets. And then we did a sermon series at Agape about our third year through the post-exilic prophets. And one of the, doing that and then working with the Society of Biblical Literature in the Hebrew section and hearing, some of the top prophet scholars in the country. Every time I would go into a homeless camp or work in ministry or do things with people, these prophetic texts kept coming to my mind. And I've come across with three things. Number one, we don't read the prophets in the church a whole lot. And there's this passage in Jeremiah 16. Is that okay?
It's okay.
Okay. Okay. In Jeremiah 16, where verse 14, where it says, "You won't remember me as the God of the Exodus." Basically, you'll remember me as the God who brings you back from captivity. And I felt that this whole restoration theme was missing in our churches, and a lot of scholars would say, yeah, that they felt that way too. And so one of the things that I saw was that God is a God of reconciliation, and the prophets were the heralds, or the ones who gave that message. And in some cases that message was a challenge, but mostly that message was using the words to create new vision. And so as we began to work with people, I began to realize that people, whether they're homeless or not, were in exile, were dislocated, and what is the message that the church has? The second thing that I came across with the prophets was that God was a hurt spouse, and in a lot of our divorce recovery, abuse ministry, we began to say, how does God respond as the abuse victim, or as the person who, in Jeremiah 3:8, initiates divorce when Israel, when they've had their last straw.
Mm-hmm.
And so I began to realize that, here God is not afraid to say, you won't mistreat me, but then God tries to, like Hosea, woo them back. And then my third point was that most people view the prophets kind of like they're at the end of the pointing finger, you. And what I try to do with the God of second chances is get us to stand beside God and be like therapists who are in a marriage counseling session, and we're witnessing God being hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the prophets. And the natural response of the prophet is to be hurt also, and to be angry also, but also to look at God and say, I would never treat you that way, and to come away with a fuller appreciation of God's love. So all of that together, as I wrote the book of The God of Second Chances, was to get people to see the prophets as advocates for God and for people, and to kind of bridge that gap.
So in Agape, as you went through that sermon series, how do you see that key idea of the prophets as being advocates for God and advocates for treating people well and those deep relationships? How have you seen that impacting Agape?
Well, like for instance, Habakkuk is, I call him a batterer intervention counselor. I mean, his whole take is, lay off, man, this is too much. He's the one saying, let's have compassion on these people. And then,
and he's talking to God at that point.
Yeah. I mean, he's saying, man, this is too much, and he's calling out for mercy for the people. On the other hand, you've got Ezekiel, who's kind of saying, let him have it. I mean, that's it. And Kathleen O'Connor, as a Jeremiah scholar, says that sometimes God looks bipolar, and I think that's one of the discussions we've had in the prophet section is God is so emotionally involved in people that there's these moments of rage and joy and happiness, and it's scary. But what we've said to Agape is we've had a lot of people who've moved themselves from being at the end of the finger to being beside God, and they're coming across, and I tell these stories in there, they're coming across saying, there's hope. God is for us. God is so passionately involved in us that God gets hurt, God loves, God shares joy. God says visions that never really happen. He'll say, you'll love me, you'll be my people, and there'll be no need for this. And it doesn't happen all the time. But that's God dreaming and hoping for a relationship. And so one of the things that I think I've learned with Agape is that people have become able to see that God is for them and God hopes for them. And our role as ministers, as prophets, is to be advocating for people and for God.
So, do you find that stance of being an advocate that it allows you to both come alongside people who have hurt and have that maybe even anger and just violence in their life because of the hurt, to advocate for them while also maybe being a parameter, setting up those safety zones that says, hey, if you step out here, you've gone too far in our midst as well. Does it work both ways?
Yeah. So, like Walter Brueggemann, Mark Hamilton, Len Sweet, Rodney Ashlock, both Mark and Rodney at Abilene, what they're telling me, and they've endorsed the book or written stuff on it, what they're saying is, theologically, it's right down the line. It's right on current. It's bringing these deep theological messages to common people. But what the response that I'm getting from some other ministers who are reading it is that this thinking has always been left in the academy, but we've never really taken it to practice in the church. And so what we have is a lot of us as ministers, we've created distance with people. And we understand the prophet for God, and we can speak the message of God, but we've created such a distance with people that we're not able to bring the needs of the people to God. And this is what the academics are saying, this is what we've been saying, this is what we're teaching in the schools, but we're not seeing this brought to light in the churches. And the people who we're reaching are saying, we're not hearing this in the church. So for me, the hope is that as ministers, we can embrace the idea of getting close enough to people to love them, to paint a new vision of hope for them, but also to let them know, that, hey, God, you don't abuse God. You don't walk all over God. This is not a once saved, always saved relationship. Covenant calls for responsibility.
So, in one sense, this book, The God of Second Chances, becomes, through Agape, a case study of how to apply a prophetic message in our modern day church context.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I've read the book, and it is it's very easy. It's very accessible as far as the writing level. But I hope our listeners can hear that the academic level is just at the highest quality.